So back in May, I was at a very good friend of mine's college graduation party. There was good food, good people, people coming together to celebrate someone busting their ass and accomplishing something pretty damn cool. And we're all sitting around hanging out, and a mutual friend of ours dropped some pictures into our group chat. And my immediate reaction was, "What in the shit?" Followed very closely by, "Oh man, it's clobbering time." And yes, I am aware that as a 38-year-old man, that is not a measured response. My player 2 was very quick to point that out to me. She also informed me that she could not currently afford bail, which, fair. I mean, she's usually right. But to my point, the pictures were of Patriot Front, marching through our hometown. And I sat with that for a while, because after spending the day around a bunch of decent people from different generations celebrating a college graduation, I couldn't stop thinking about something. Bernays, my dad, the harvest, and this weird feeling that maybe I'd just been sent the ending to a story I've been telling for the last 3 episodes. So welcome back to Side Quest Sunday. I'm Nate, your resident average Joe, and this is How Did We Get Here? Part 4, 15 minutes down the road. So, I figure it might be a good idea to answer the question, who the hell are these people? Because I recognize the name. I'd seen their pictures before. I'd seen people online talking about them, but if you'd asked me a month ago to sit down and tell you who Patriot Front was, I couldn't have done it. So I did what I always do. I started reading, and it turns out Patriot Front was founded by a guy named Thomas Rousseau. And if that name doesn't ring a bell, honestly, it didn't for me either. But the context matters because before Patriot Front, Rousseau was involved with a group called Vanguard America, a white nationalist organization, and he was present at Charlottesville in 2017. You know, the rally where Heather Heyer was murdered? After Charlottesville blew up nationally, Patriot Front splintered off and became its own organization. The Southern Poverty Law Center designates Patriot Front as a hate group. Now, I know someone listening just rolled their eyes because I mentioned the SPLC, and that's fair. Some people trust them, some people don't. So let's do what I think is probably the fairest thing. Let's let Patriot Front tell us who Patriot Front is, using their own words, and from their own manifesto. I quote, "America is not a nation of immigrants. America is a nation of citizens whose ancestors overcame the greatest hardships imaginable to forge a prosperous nation for their posterity." That word, posterity, that one stopped me because posterity means descendants, future generations, bloodlines. So, in other words, America was built by a certain group of people for a certain group of people to be inherited by a certain group of people. And my friends, we've had words for that ideology for a long time, and patriotism just ain't one of them. And then I started noticing something else. The uniforms, the marching formations. And I had a thought. This is branding. This is optics. It's marketing. Hell, Bernays probably would have looked at this and gone, the kids have got potential. Because if 10 random dudes stand around yelling, then no one really takes notice. But you put 10 guys in matching shirts, matching khakis with matching masks, and then march them in formation carrying flags, and suddenly it feels much bigger, more disciplined, more organized. Even if it mostly looks like Geek Squad got radicalized, or Old Navy launched a coup. And one thing researchers have pointed out is that groups like this often target smaller communities. Not necessarily because small towns are full of neo Nazis, because trust me, they're not, but because small towns have often experienced decades of economic decline. Factory closures, fewer opportunities, less local journalism, communities feeling forgotten. People carrying legitimate frustrations, and angry people are very easy to recruit. Last week's episode was called The Harvest, and maybe this is what growing season really looks like. So I sat with those pictures for a little while and I kept thinking about this series that I had been brainstorming. Because if you've been hanging out with me for the last 3 episodes, then you know we've basically been pulling on one thread this entire time. It all started with Edward Bernays, a guy who, back in 1928, pretty much wrote the whole playbook for modern public relations and propaganda. Not necessarily by telling people what to think, but by attaching ideas to identities, making people feel like rejecting an idea somehow meant rejecting who they were. Then we talked about my dad, a hard-working Vietnam vet, a Reagan guy, a guy who genuinely believed certain things because he thought they would lead to a better life for his family. And if you listen to part 2, then you know we argued. A lot, especially towards the end. He fell for Trump the same way he fell for Reagan, and we argued about Trump pretty much right up until he died. He never really came around. At least, not in the way that I wanted him to. And honestly, I still do kind of wrestle with that. Because I loved my dad. I still love my dad. I don't think he was stupid or hateful. I just think he was sold a story. And I think there are millions of Americas that have been sold that same story. Then we got to part 3, the harvest. The idea that if you spend decades hollowing out communities, weakening labor, concentrating wealth, and telling people everything is fine while their lived experience says otherwise, eventually something grows. People don't like feeling forgotten. People don't like watching opportunities disappear. People don't like working harder and feeling like they're falling further behind. Those frustrations are very real and tangible. And if no one shows up with an answer, eventually someone shows up with a target. And that's the part I couldn't stop thinking about because I don't think Patriot Front just magically appeared 15 minutes from my house. I think they found fertile soil. And I don't mean that as an insult to where I live. I love where I live. I think what bothered me most was this. This wasn't a documentary. It wasn't cable news. It wasn't Twitter, and it wasn't Charlottesville. It was 15 minutes from my home. And that's weird. It's a little unsettling because all of a sudden the rabbit hole isn't academic anymore. It's local. And maybe that's what this entire series has really been about. Not Patriot Front or not even politics. Maybe it's been about understanding what happens when legitimate frustrations get redirected toward people who did not cause them. Immigrants, the gay community, the trans community, anyone who's easy to point at, anyone who's considered different. Instead of asking much harder questions, like who's making these decisions, who's benefiting, who's profiting, who's telling us who to blame. Because that's the thread. Bernays, my dad, the harvest, and now 15 minutes down the road. I don't know, maybe this is where the road was always headed, or maybe understanding how we got here is how we stop going any further. So after building these episodes and sitting with all of this for a month, after talking about it with friends and talking about it with my player 2, after thinking about this entire series from start to finish, I think I've landed somewhere. And maybe you'll agree with me, or maybe you won't, but this is where I've landed. I don't think the guys marching around in matching khakis are the whole problem. I just think they're a symptom. And don't get me wrong, symptoms matter because symptoms can hurt people. Symptoms can absolutely become dangerous if you ignore them. I don't think they're the architects. I think they're what grows in the field after 40 plus years of planting the wrong seeds. I think the bigger problem is what happens when people have legitimate frustrations and no one ever helps them understand where those frustrations should actually be pointed. People are struggling. People do feel left behind. People work hard and still can't get ahead. People watch entire communities change and they watch opportunities disappear. They watch prices continue to skyrocket, watch wages stay exactly where they've always been. And all of those frustrations are real. And if you don't help people understand complicated problems, someone else is going to show up and hand them a very simple answer, usually involving someone who had absolutely nothing to do with causing the problems. Anyone different, anyone easy to point at, anyone who can't easily fight back. And I think that's what bothers me the most, because I don't think most people wake up one morning and decide, you know what? Today I'm going to become an extremist. I think a lot of people are genuinely scared. They're angry. They do feel forgotten. And someone eventually comes along and says, hey, fella, I've got somebody you can blame. And blaming people feels good, at least for a little while. It's so much easier than asking harder questions. It's easier than asking who profits, who benefits, who's funding what, who's making decisions, who's selling us stories, who's convincing us that our neighbor is somehow responsible for problems that they did not create. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm oversimplifying everything, but after a month of thinking about this, that's where I've landed. And honestly, I think understanding the mechanism matters because you can't interrupt something if you can't recognize it. And if this entire 4-part rabbit hole has taught me anything, it's that I probably need to spend less time doom scrolling and more time helping my kids learn how to ask the good questions. Because good questions might be the closest thing we've got to an antidote. Like I've said in other episodes, I have a 12-year-old son and a 9-year-old daughter. And unfortunately for them, they take after me. They love to ask questions and they love to research stuff. They do their own little deep dives. They'll hit you with a, yeah, but why though? And suddenly you're 30 minutes into explaining how the microwave works. And honestly, to tell you the truth, I love that about them. And I guess if they ever hear this someday, or maybe if this episode somehow survives long enough that they stumble across it years from now, I want them to hear something. Kiddos, always pay attention. Always think for yourself. Never stop asking questions. Always be curious. Always remember to be decent. Because decent people built just about every good thing that your dad has ever known. And don't let anyone else do your thinking for you. Not the politicians, not the talking heads, not podcasters, hell, not even me. Always look at the receipts. Pull on the threads. Read things yourself. Change your mind when new information comes along. And don't ever be afraid to say, I was wrong. Because that's not weakness. That's genuine growth. And stand up for people, always, especially when it's inconvenient, especially when they're getting picked on, especially when everyone else is staying quiet. Because at the end of the day, we're all just people. We're just trying to get through life, trying to raise our families, trying to pay bills, trying to leave things just a little better than we found them. And I genuinely hope we fix some of this in my lifetime. I really, really do. But if we don't, then I'm handing the baton to you two. You've already got the curiosity, and you've already got the instincts. You've already figured out that when someone gives you a really simple answer to a really complicated problem, you should probably stop and ask, okay, who benefits if I believe that? And Dad, this part's for you. You taught me to question things, even if we ended up questioning different things. And I'm not going to go easy on these two either, because if I do, how are they ever going to learn anything? All right. Thanks for letting me talk to my kiddos for just a minute. Oh, you didn't tune me out? What? Some of that resonated with you too? Well, I guess in the immortal words of Freddy Krueger, you're all my children now. Nah. But seriously, my friends, something's gotta change. I don't think that's a particularly controversial statement anymore. We have been pulling on this thread for 4 episodes now. Bernays, my dad, Reagan, the harvest, Patriot Front showing up 15 minutes from my house. And if I'm being honest, I don't think things are going to get better on their own. I think people have to decide they want better. But I also keep coming back to that graduation party because I think that part matters more. I spent that entire day around people from different walks of life, different generations, different backgrounds, different life experiences. And every single person that saw those pictures pretty much had the exact same reaction: disgust, confusion, embarrassment, mostly just, what the hell are we doing? And I think that's important because when you spend enough time online, you can start believing everyone hates each other. Everyone's radicalized, everyone's angry, everyone's picked a team. But then you go outside or you go to a graduation party, you celebrate someone accomplishing something really cool. You laugh, you eat too much food, you talk about your kids, you complain about work, you hug people you haven't seen in a while, and you realize, no, most people are still just people, just trying to get through life, just trying to do right by their families, just trying to leave things just a little better than they found them. And maybe that's why I still have hope. And not because I think someone is just going to magically swoop in and fix everything like Superman. And it's not because I think, well, we just need to make it to the next election and that'll solve it. And honestly, not because I think one podcast changes the world. But a few weeks ago, I got a message from someone who found the show through an episode that I was pretty convinced was one of the weakest things that I'd ever put out. And they told me it made them rethink some things in their own life, reevaluate relationships, look at situations differently. And I remember reading that and thinking, huh, maybe we don't get to decide what resonates with people. Maybe we just tell the truth as best we can, share what we've learned, pull on threads, and ask questions. And every once in a while, something lands with someone exactly when they needed to hear it. So maybe one podcast doesn't change the world, but maybe it helps one person change their world. And honestly, maybe that's enough. And it proves that people can learn, people can ask questions, people can follow the receipts. Hell, I did, and I still am. And if a kid sitting in a military barracks with no electronics and a stack of history books can start pulling on threads, maybe other people can too. I don't know. Maybe that's naive, or maybe it's not. But I know this much: I'd rather raise my kids believing people can grow than teach them to give up. And if this entire rabbit hole has taught me anything, it's this: pay attention, ask questions, but always be decent. And don't let anyone else do your thinking for you, because the mechanism only works if no one looks under the hood. And for the last 4 Sundays, we've been looking under the hood. Maybe that's enough. Maybe it isn't. But you know what? It's a start, and starts matter. And all right, my friends, I think that's going to do it for How Did We Get Here? All 4 parts. And honestly, this one mattered to me, maybe more than I realized when I sat down and started brainstorming it. Because this wasn't really about Patriot Front. It wasn't really about Ronald Reagan or Edward Bernays or my dad. It was just about trying to understand how people end up where they end up, and trying to understand how we stop handing complicated problems over to people selling simple answers. And if you've ridden shotgun with me through all 4 parts, thank you. Seriously, I appreciate you hanging in there. And if this series resonated with you, then do me a favor and share it with someone. That's it. That's the ask. Maybe it'll spark a conversation. Maybe it'll make someone ask a question. Or maybe it'll help someone pull on a thread they hadn't thought about pulling before. And honestly, maybe that's enough. If you want to continue the conversation, then do me a favor and come hang out with us over in the lobby. It's the digital campfire of Average Joe Nerdcast. There are good people there. But producer Steve is unfortunately there too. Just ignore him. I'll drop links to the Facebook lobby group and the Discord lobby in the show notes. To my player 2, thank you for always being the voice in my ear reminding me that not every battle needs to be fought. Thank you for listening to me ramble about propaganda, labor history, and Nazis and khakis for the last month. And thank you for being the reason any of this exists in the first place. To my son and my daughter, keep being curious. Keep being weird. Keep asking, yeah, but why though? I hope you never lose that, because the world definitely could use more of that. And to my dad, we argued a lot, right up until the end, about politics, about the country, about what was true. And I still wish we'd had just one more conversation. But thank you. Thank you for teaching me not to go easy, for teaching me to question things, for making me laugh, for never going easy on me on Bloody Roar. Thank you for all the weird little pieces of you that somehow still show up in me. I'm still pulling on threads. I'm still trying to figure it all out. And I think we'd probably still be arguing about half of this. But I'd give just about anything to have that argument just one more time. I've been Nate. Stay gold, nerd bold. And remember, we're all just people, just trying to figure this whole thing out. I'll catch you on the next one. Oh, and one more thing. Now that all the heartfelt stuff is out of the way, now that I've talked to my player 2, talked to my kids, talked to my dad's ghost, talked about hope, about propaganda, about labor, about grief, talked about all the serious adult things, it's joke time. And if you've been hanging around AJN for any amount of time, then you know every once in a while a group of people comes along that are just so profoundly goofy that my inner George Carlin wakes up and starts pacing around the room. Your Honor, I'd like to submit into evidence the episodes Are We Getting Dumber?, We've Never Been to Space, and now this little beaut that I'm calling The Diet Coke Nazis Came to Town. And look, I know they're dangerous. I know extremism isn't funny. I know hatred hurts people, but man, sometimes the aesthetics are so aggressively lame that you almost have to laugh. And if you've never seen Patriot Front before, just imagine if somebody assigned a high school group project that said, okay, everyone, your assignment is to rebrand fascism, but make it look like an Under Armour catalog. That's basically the whole vibe. First of all, the uniforms. Khakis? Matching navy shirts. You look like the world's angriest Best Buy employees. Like State Farm denied one too many claims and someone took it personally. And can I talk about the masks? Because these guys love talking about courage, masculinity, defending Western civilization, but they dress like they're trying not to get recognized by their aunt at Kroger. My friends, if you genuinely believed you're saving the Republic, why do you look like you're trying to return a stolen weed eater to Lowe's without a receipt? And then there are the flyers. Defend American labor. Ah, interesting. Because that does sound almost reasonable for about 4 seconds until you realize it's being distributed by the human equivalent of a YouTube comment section. Because this is one of the oldest scams in the political playbook. People are struggling. Wages have stagnated. Jobs have disappeared. Housing gets expensive. Healthcare costs more than a used F-150. And someone comes along and says, hey, I know who did this. and then points at someone who had absolutely nothing to do with causing it. Real brave stuff, fellas. Round of applause for everybody. And honestly, the funniest thing to me is that they carry themselves like they're some elite revolutionary movement. My friends, you look like a landscaping crew with delusions of grandeur. You look like a faction from a dystopian video game that gets annihilated in the tutorial. You kind of look like Cobra Commander's interns. And I genuinely cannot stress this enough. If your political philosophy requires hiding your face, then there's a 100% chance your philosophy sucks. Because if you really believed you were on the right side of history, you probably wouldn't be worried about getting recognized by the local librarian, or your boss, or your mom, or your parole officer. And here's the thing, and I really want you to hear me on this one. America is messy. It's weird. But more importantly, America is immigrants. It's labor movements. It's jazz music. It's barbecues. It's comic books. It's Halo LAN parties. And it's people disagreeing at Thanksgiving dinner over whether or not the earth looks like a dinner plate. And millions of people trying to build a decent life together. That's the story. That has always been the story of America. You guys are not defending America. You're defending fan fiction. So anyways, the Diet Coke Nazis came to town, and they looked ridiculous. The graduation party was way more fun, and the food was really good. And thankfully, most people still seem to know the difference between patriotism and cosplay.
Game over.